So why do we think old stuff is better? This is a thought that just occurred to me and I had to share it while it was still fresh in my mind. As I was walking through the house, I just saw the my home on YouTube, and one of the videos was uh, one of the guitarists I watch, and it says he so and so gets his hand on a 1959 Gibson Les Paul Standard, which is a guitar for those who don't play. Considered one of the more desirable guitars, of course, because it's from the 50s. It's one of the originals, and finding them intact is harder. And as a stereo collector, I totally understand the desire to collect old stuff. I have a whole bunch of old vintage stereos from the 70s, and I love them. They're built high quality, the components are well made, and I can understand that older instruments are the same way. When you go back several centuries, the reason why some old violins and cellos are more desirable and worth hundreds of thousands of dollars perhaps is not just because they're old, but the rarity combined with the fact that many of these were made from woods from old growth trees that people are just obsessed with because the rings on the trees, for example, were really tight. There's a certain group of violins that were made in Europe, I don't know what they were, but they were made from these trees that had suffered this really, this bad drought, and so they were really tight rings, and it made a certain resonance with the wood. Not to get off track here, but so there was a reason for something old being desirable, because you can't find that wood anymore. But when you come into the 50s and 60s, a lot of the early guitars were actually just made out of whatever wood was available. They were some of the first guitars. They weren't trying to compete with other companies, they were just making guitars. And so these people will say things like, oh yeah, this is an original, Fender that was made with some kind of an alder or ash from this particular country or state. And it doesn't fucking matter. It really doesn't matter. They weren't chosen by the company because they were better. They were chosen because they were available. Same thing with the components. So what I'm getting at is that in the modern day, if you were to build a guitar, let's say, you could build a far superior guitar to a 1959 Les Paul, custom or standard. It wouldn't matter because all it is a fretboard, strings, a guitar body, pickups. What more do you need? Why can't you replicate what was there before? So what I'm saying here is that there's a nostalgia associated with old things that makes us believe that they were better. Many times they actually were. Don't get me wrong, because like I said, some things are desirable for a reason. There were tools, any tools you find at a garage sale, from the 40s, 50s, 60s, those were made with high quality steel. You can find an old knife from a couple hundred years ago and refinish it, and it will just be gorgeous. Way better than the shit that they put out today that they consider to be quality. But there are still quality things to be found today that can be found even much cheaper than some of these collectibles, if you will. Some of the plastics from the 40s was very highly desirable, right? Because it was called Bakelite, and it was some of the first plastic, 30s and 40s. But it's crap. It falls apart, it cracks, and it breaks. So we're collecting it for the nostalgia of what it is. And as long as we acknowledge that, well, then we can be happy to collect old stuff without thinking that it's actually the best. Because, like someone said about the old vintage stereo components, they were phenomenal, sure. But you have to replace the capacitors. The solder joints are going to get loose. The wires are going to get old and corrode. You can buy a much better stereo and much better speakers today than you ever could back then. But the nostalgia isn't there, and the price is much higher. And I think that's the problem. You can buy much better quality of instruments, of cars, of anything today, of stereos, of amplifiers, but the problem is that there are very few people who make high quality stuff anymore, and therefore it's considered a rarity. Therefore, you're going to pay a lot more. And so the point I'm making here is that there was one time in history where things were made quality because that's how people wanted to reflect their values. They wanted their company to be known for making something that was good, something that lasted. And once we started making these cheap disposable transistors and crappy stereos, and you get the Magnavox all-in-one stereos of the 80s, everything just went to shit. And this is why people yearn for the old stuff. It's a societal desperation to get back to when people gave a shit about the things they made, and a realization that the commercialized society we live in is failing us. So, those are my thoughts on that. Peace out. Hit subscribe and all that stuff, and join my Patreon if you choose, and join my Discord if you choose, but don't hit the bell icon. Do not. You don't need notifications for these damn videos. Turn off all your notifications and delete all your apps from your phone. Do it now. Peace out.